Morning, my friends. I wasn't really planning on doing a video this morning, but it's been something that's been kind of topic on the subject of Star Trek, the role-playing game, especially the earliest versions of it. That's been kind of brewing in my brain, and a topic that we're here in Unscripted Unchained got me kind of really, I don't know. I want to get my 2 cents in on it while it's still rumbling around my brain. Excuse me a second. So I'm getting up. It's pretty chilly here in the great Midwest. From an early perspective, when I first got the Star Trek role-playing game back in the 80s, I started buying it out of interest because I grew up with Star Trek, and it's a apples and oranges approach to science fiction compared to Star Wars, my other huge sci-fi attraction. And the problem we ran into, and I still see it because I'm trying to chew my way through the original first series episode of the Star Trek, Captain Kirk Star Trek from the earliest days, and their subject material for their episodes can be too cerebral, if you will, to some aspects. And I saw this in one of the earliest Star Trek computer-based, PC-based games that they created for the computer, and it was the same thing. It was mostly troubleshooting and trying to be a puzzle solver. There wasn't all this high action. You didn't have high adventure, which is something that is that dramatic flair that a lot of people get from the Star Wars universe. There's so much action, and the action just rolls along, and we don't stop and pause and think, and we don't have the Spock moments where we're trying to puzzle our way through something, or bringing out our little techno goobers and running them back and forth saying, "Oh," No, it was go and more along the action of the action TV, video, movies, and things that were a lot of us young men anyway were geared towards. So from the playing perspective, some of the earlier modules, some of the TV series material that we had available was very dry and very lacking, and in part because of its material subject matter. A big part. I grant you that Desilu Studios had a very low budget for Star Trek, and that they did quite a bit with what little they had to work with. I mean, you really didn't have to go and go far to see, from a visual perspective, by today's standards, when we're used to almost near perfect CGI, of just how crude the sets were and how often they got reused. And I noticed as the seasons progress that even becomes less popular. The Starship Enterprise becomes less populated. For example, we know there's a crew of excess of 500 people on board. In the first season, you really see a lot more activity going on in the hallways. A lot of stuff on characters that are just background material. You see more variety of locations. You see rec rooms and the gymnasium. We see this more than just a handful of corridors and the bridge and the key locations. It shows that it's a bigger place. But as their budgets tightened up over the following few seasons, that got to be more of a problem. And they chose to use their limited finances towards trying to create better sets. And then you can see it in the aliens too. A lot of the alien makeup and stuff was questionable or very crude by today's standards. But from the perspective of play, when we wanted to translate, now unlike today, where we have a plethora of material to work with, we got insane amount of novels, we have animations, we got cartoons, we got video games, we have the various TV series and movies. So we have a huge pool of mental material in order to connect with this particular genre and to feed our imagination when it comes to creating play material for our players, and as players to put ourselves in perspective of what it would be to be members of the Federation. So in the earliest days, one of our big problems as players and as a GM was this need to somehow try to conform to what we saw in the TV series, which was very bland. It was very not high adventure. So it caused its stumbling block, especially for young men. I was in my early teens, mid-teens, and it was when I first got my first book, and it became uh, so dry that my friends and I just we didn't play. We played and then we didn't. We played and we didn't. We played and we didn't. And then other better game systems or other more depth, detail oriented game systems came along, and then I just continued buying the facet material for Star Trek as it came out, mostly because I liked the reading material and I liked the reference material, and it just was where I spent my money, among other game systems of the day. The other problem we came into, and I still hear this over and over and over again about people who tried to play the early games, and to some extent the later games that came. And there was another set of, I don't remember who put it out, but there was another game system that came out for Star Trek in the late '90s, and it didn't do well either. It didn't stick around for very long. It was two dimensional in the aspect of everybody was a member of the bridge crew of an Enterprise space type starship, and we were trying to do starshipy things. Now, it wasn't until later, second generation, the next generation, we start seeing more variety of things to be done, and then followed by Deep Space Nine and Voyager and so on and so forth, that we've seen a much bigger, expanded universe, if you will. The more episodes that showed other than Starfleet personnel being involved. And I liked that take because the early FASA game tried to take it to that angle before the TV movies and TV series and movies did, and fed into later episodes, I guess, because I understand that some of this material was research material for some of those later writers. I'm just, that's hearsay, of course. I can't back that up with facts, but the thing for a lot of players and GMs was, how do we get away from this Captain Kirk, Spock, Dr. McCoy triad mindset? And we used smaller ships. We designated lesser, the players became members of the crew and not the command staff. But two separate occasions, I was able to run a campaign where we played non-Federation or non-Starfleet personnel. One of them was using this traders, captains, and merchant princes, and it became very interesting because you could expand into the larger universe and see the world from a more realistic perspective. One of the problems with the Enterprise, for example, it's the flagship of the Federation. It is the peak of their technology that they allow out and into action, so to speak. And it also has this uber clean environment about it. So it's always so neat, and everything usually ends up neatly figured out. They always find an answer. Now, if we look at the early TV series, in the first 8 episodes, we see, mostly dealing with crisis. So in one episode, we're dealing with an entity that's able to take over bodies, and another one is this hyper intelligent yet very juvenile young man who cannot be left to function in a normal human society and has to be picked up by his caretakers because he has godlike abilities. He's like almost a Q-like character, and we didn't have a reference for him at that point. Then there's another one where they pick up a virus that alters the outlook, and there's an episode where they in the previews for the opening credits for Star Trek, the early TV series, you'll see one where you get a young Sulu with a rapier in his hand, and he's charging down a hallway. Well, in that episode, he becomes infected, and it causes him to act outside of what his normal behavior patterns are, and we see repeated types of this sort of thing, and trying to translate this well into an RPG wasn't very good. It wasn't very easy, especially for young men in my experience when I was younger, because it was boring, right? It's not unlike Rob Gustafson when he comments his experiences were tainted because, to some degree, because it seemed like we had this all inspiring technology at our fingertips, and yet there was always some reason why the sensors can't scan something, or there's always some material or effect that's preventing a teleporter from teleporting into a situation and teleporting out of a situation. Well, from a reaction of reality situation, I don't think I think that there would be a lot of that, and yet a lot of not. It's finding that balance in there and making it make sense and being consistent. The game doesn't cover it because they didn't have answers for that sort of thing, and they didn't explain it well in the TV series because nobody cared. It wasn't about that. It was about just showing this technology and capabilities and stuff. So it's not unreasonable to understand why some people in the earlier games found it more complex. I would be interested to at some point, I'm going to have to get the latest version, or at least look at it, because I want to see just how much different it is. I suspect in some aspects it's still cerebral in its approach to roleplay, its approach to how you envision being a member of the Federation and so on and so forth. And yet I suspect there's also a dramatic flair attached to it now that wasn't there at the time back in the day, because we see this full circle. We want to go back to the original kind of stuff. And like I said, watch the earliest episodes of the first series, and half of them would be very hard to translate into a tabletop game that would maintain interest for any length of time. The other half, well, there's plenty of possibilities there, but you have to look at it from a different, open perspective. Now, as I put in a recent comment to, or a reply to Edward's comment on one of my video, one of the things that FASA dropped the ball on, in my opinion, and I blame this also on the Star Trek canon. It's only until Enterprise, the series Enterprise, comes out that we start to see more character development for the other two key members of the Federation. We well know the human factor. We're human. We understand our place in the universe and our place in the Star Trek universe. The Vulcans are because of Spock, the Vulcans are heavily developed. It's like the Klingons. The Klingons are extremely well developed, and that's because they became a very big fan favorite as the bad guy, but then later they became more than the bad guy. They became our sometimes unwilling or aggressive associates and friends. And so we build on that in all these TV series, movies, animations, books, and so on. The Romulans have always been a mysterious mystique, and they've been avoided in some aspects. There's a little bit more depth to them now because of some of the movies in the recent years, but there wasn't that for decades. And I think in part was because they were too much like the Vulcans. They were just opposite. Everything a Vulcan is what a Romulan isn't, and vice versa in some people's minds. So they didn't feel the need to go into depth. What we didn't see are the Andorians and the Terralists. I mean, come on, these are two of the key founding members of the Federation. And if you go by the original old school canon and the material that was provided by non-canon sources, as well as canon approved non-official canon resources, there were five founding races: the Alpha Centaurans, which were very human-like, and their parents were a member of the Federation, the first five. So now, because thanks to Enterprise, that's been modified. The canon now says there's only four, but we don't have a lot of material for the Andorians or the Terralists in the FASA game, and that's because there wasn't a lot to work with. They have some stuff, but nowhere near what it ought to be. And now, thanks to Enterprise, we really have a much better understanding of the Andorians, at least, and their mindsets and their philosophy and some of their world building and things like that. Why they're an aggressive species, why their aggression is the polar opposite of Klingons and Romulans. They're passionate, and yet very methodical in their reasoning about why they do what they do. And it's more about an honor. It's almost a Bushido to some degree, mindset. Where what we still don't see much of is the Terralites. I think the Terralites are an enigma for just about everybody because we know they're an argumentative race. We know that they're an aggressive race to some degree. We know that they are heavily into being merchants, and especially mining resource for whatever reason. We know that they have a very pricklish kind of pugnacious personality type. But other than that, we don't know much about their home world or their origins or their personality types aside from these very narrow-minded or very narrow focused blocks, which is strange considering how much we know about so many other alien races. It's like someplace in the middle of the second generation, it's like they forgot the Orions existed and they created the Ferengi. The Ferengi are much more, I don't know, dramatic and alien looking than the Orions. And the Orions, the original canon, created some uncomfortable social issues for our modern age because the fact that the Orions still deal in slavery, although it's not slavery per se as we think we know it, although it showed that way in Enterprise. The Enterprise does it better. And once again, the Enterprise TV series focuses on the early Federation, and we didn't have the Ferengi, we have the Orions, right? And there's a reason the Orions are never members of the Federation, because they chose not to be, and because they don't want to conform to the Federation, specifically certain ideals of it. And yet, if you want to play as a character race, they're very interesting. They're your great pirate type, aggressive type merchant class people. So there's a lot of room for play, a lot of interest, and there's some extreme depth to the Rydulian system itself, the system that the Orions originate from and developed out of. And I'm going to be doing some videos on that in the future because it deserves to be explored, in my opinion. And of course, as always, I just wanted to get my 2 cents worth. In this case, I guess my 10 cents worth. Then, till next time, game on.